Well, good afternoon, Student Pride. Hey! Well, aren't you the luckiest people on this earth to get to witness the first panel of the afternoon, which is something that's very, very close to my heart, hashtag Activism. So what is the panel about today, everybody? Activism. I think we need much more power and strength behind that as a movement. What is it about?
Activism.
Well done. That's the kind of strength I like to hear. I am Dr. Elly Barnes, and I'm the CEO of Educate and Celebrate, and I get the most wonderful pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and also those watching us on metro.co.uk Facebook Live. So please feel free to be part of the conversation. Now, you can tweet, and you will see at the screens, your tweets will come up at the side there. So please feel that you are part of this conversation. Now, I am sitting here with lots of my heroes this afternoon, and I'm sure they need no introduction, but here we have Jonathon Blake, we have Peter Tatchell, and we have Paula Akpan, and Paris Lees is on her way, will be here any second now. So just wanted to comment on what we've seen. Yes, 50 years of activism from the Stonewall riots. That was when we took to the streets. That's our community, all genders, all sexual orientations, all races, you know, and that is so important. And I just want to ask Paula, first of all, you know, that was led by, the prominent leaders were trans activists, and moreover, trans people of colour. And is that an important thing for us as activists?
Oh, absolutely, it's huge, because I think black and brown people mobilised most of the movements, if not all of the movements that take place. So it's being at the very bottom, or being seen at the very bottom, due to, you know, living in a white heteronormative society. So then we end up representing and fighting for everyone, because you can only free everyone once you've freed black trans people, black queer trans people. So it's huge that it was started and kind of, well, this particular event was headed up by all recognisable faces such as Marsha P. Johnson. Yeah. But also it's worth remembering that a lot of these movements have been happening, or like there were organisations such as, I think it was like Marcus Hirschfeld started like a gay rights, the first ever one in the world. So I think Stonewall was a particular time, it was a particular moment, and it was a huge catalyst. But there have been organisations beforehand as well, which is quite interesting.
That's a really good point you're making, because it was in a particular heated political climate at that time. Peter, do you want to comment and expand on that? So what was happening at that time? Why was that the time for the uprising?
Well, of course, the gay liberation movement emerged in the context of the black liberation movement and the women's liberation movement, and also in the United States in the huge mass movement against America's aggression against the people of Vietnam. So it was in a revolutionary era that this movement arose. The year before, in 1968, there'd been the student rebellions in Paris, there'd been the Cultural Revolution in China, there'd been the uprising, the non-violent uprising in Czechoslovakia, which was brutally suppressed by Russian tanks. This was a period of global rebellion. And of course, in the global south, there were liberation movements. In the Portuguese colonies of Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, there were liberation movements against Portuguese colonialism. There was the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. There was the movements in South Asia, in Indonesia. The Communist Party had been suppressed, and 1 million people had been slaughtered, but there was still rebellion there. And of course, in East Timor, they began their fight for liberation from Indonesian rule. So that's the context, the global context in which the LGBT plus movement arose.
Great, that's wonderful. Thank you for giving us a perspective on that. I just want to come over to Jonathon. Now, Jonathon Blake, founding member of Lesbians and Gays Support the Minors. So we're moving on from 1969 here up to 1984 when you formed. Did any of what has happened over here inform the kind of activism of the LGSM?
Oh, of course. I mean, there's always been this incredible sort of movement and political. It comes out of the trade union movement in this country, who want to push barriers and push things forward. And for members of LGSM, Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Minors, it was a really important time. There was this battle between Margaret Thatcher and her government that wanted to smash communities. She didn't believe in society, which was crazy. So everything had informed us, and we wanted to be there. It was a battle that needed to be fought.
Yeah, absolutely. That building cohesive communities is absolutely key.
Yeah.
Completely. And that takes me back to the legalisation of homosexuality, 1967, up till Stonewall riots, 69, up to in 84, and of course we had the dreaded Section 28, which came in 1988, which stopped us, for me as an educator, really from introducing queerness into the education system.
I mean, what was really interesting was that when Pride, the film, came out, there were a number of us from LGSM who would go around and we would meet with students and with school kids. And I remember the very first time that we went to talk with a group, there was a member of Stonewall. And he got up and said, you have to remember that if Section 28 was still in existence, we would not be able to speak to you. Yeah. And that was frightening. And you kind of thought, yes, that it was a way of sort of just getting rid of a whole portion of society.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we're eradicated. There was silence around it.
Yeah.
So the Stonewall riots then, coming back to Peter, how did that inform what happened with Pride? Because the first Pride March a year after, was it that strength, do you think, that was gained from the Stonewall riots that led to the first Pride marches?
Well, as the video just mentioned, the significant thing that came out of the Stonewall riots was the formation of the Gay Liberation Front in New York. And that led to a march demanding civil rights in late 1969. And then following that came the idea of what became known as Gay Pride, but was actually called the Christopher Street Gay Parade, Christopher Street being in the gay village area of New York. And once it began in New York, it quickly spread all across the US to Britain and many other countries.
Yeah.
So it was a movement that had a global impact.
Brilliant.
And of course, we're still seeing that global impact ripple out, in so many countries just in the last decade or so, like in Jamaica or Uganda, they're having their first Pride parades, and often in circumstances of great danger, which is an incredible, fact of their courage and determination, given the fact they're likely to be arrested or beaten. So Pride is still an ongoing process of rippling out, and there are still many countries that have never ever had a Pride movement. There's still many countries that don't have openly gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender movements. So, for example, I was working with activists in Sudan some years ago, and they've never been able to openly organize, let alone have any kind of protest, because the penalty for homosexuality in Sudan is death.
Yeah. So do you feel, Paula, that Pride's we're here today, we're celebrating today with all these lovely voices on this conversation today. Do you still feel that Pride is a protest? Are these places for activists like ourselves?
Yeah, because we're inherently political. Just existing in your queer body is political. But then I think it then is further compounded when you are black or brown, when you are trans, because despite kind of being a core part of the movement, there are also very specific cultural nuances or gender identity nuances that get left behind. And I think especially with being LGBTQ+, you can feel like, well, I'm part of a marginalized group, I'm oppressed as it is, so therefore you can't also put that kind of oppression towards other people within your community, which then means that black and brown, queer and trans people get pushed out further from the community that is meant to be like a home or a space to us. So yes, there is a lot more visibility, but then if we're not involved in kind of the creating of these organizations or creating of these events, then there are only certain voices, there are only certain people who are platformed, which is unfortunately tends to be cis, gay, white men, and it means that a lot of the other voices within our community, we get pushed out and therefore have to create our own spaces. So, for example, Lady Phil with UK Black Pride, or Pussy Palace or Babes, it's having to form these different spaces outside of kind of traditional maybe pride areas, because we don't see ourselves and therefore sometimes feel quite unwelcome.
Right, which is really sad. And we can look at the flag today. I've seen that there is the flag on the floor. Have you all seen that today? Yes? Oh, it got a round of applause. Brilliant. So it'd be good to get your thoughts on that, because what you're saying, that is a kind of intersectionality that we're trying to get all our voices together, and that's kind of being represented in the flag today. So we've got the rainbow flag here, we've got the trans arrow, and we have race. I think we have that down the side there. How do we feel about this new flag? How do you feel about that, Jonathon? Do you think it's a good thing?
Oh, I think it's always a good thing. I mean, I think that visibility is really important. And that goes right the way across the board. For me, as an HIV positive person, it is really important that one becomes visible, that people sort of learn to understand what this disease is about, and then deal with it. And we need to sort of battle against stigma. So yet again, you get this another sort of movement within, the gay and lesbian movement.
Yes, because we forget there are so many different movements within our community.
Yeah.
Yes, not always homogenous,
No.
Peter, do you want to comment on that?
But of course, the traditional 6 or 8 color flag was never intended to represent people or communities. It was to represent values and ideals.
Right.
So by adding the black and the brown, we're introducing a representation of a group of people and a community, which is very different from all the other colors.
Right.
So maybe we need to completely redesign the flag so it's inclusive of all peoples and all colors, and ditch all these values.
Right, okay. Is it about the values? Is it about the colors? Because I know they all mean quite positive. It's life, love, healing,
harmony, peace, or
yes. So they all mean quite positive things, don't they?
I think I can understand somewhat what you're saying, but also it's remembering that we're not all on an even playing field, and we don't want it to turn into an all lives matter kind of situation when talking about the flag. And I think it's really important to note that having these colours can be quite important for some people, because it feels like, yes, visibility, but also that can't be it. There has to be more than that. We have to go beyond just calls for visibility, because then we end up, there's room to fall into like a safety pin situation where, like white people were wearing pins that said, if you feel threatened on a bus, then come find me. But that's not enough. And if you are kind of within this marginalised community, you want to see structural change rather than, well, we've added in 2 colours, so, you're good.
So we're all right now.
But I would add that if we are going to add in other colours to represent other marginalised communities, I think it's actually quite insulting to people of East Asian origin, Chinese, Japanese, Malay, and so on, for them not to also be included, because they are an excluded minority or a marginalised minority within our own community, which don't get the attention that they rightly deserve.
Absolutely. And there is that thing about the hierarchy. Is there some kind of hierarchy of equality going on here with the flag?
I'm not against it. I'm all in favour of inclusion.
Yeah, of course.
But I just think it has to be really inclusive.
Yeah.
But I think it's also worth remembering that brown often means people who identify as South Asian, but also East Asian. But I think if there is kind of within the East Asian LGBTQ communities, these kind of feelings of discord, then that's an intra-community conversation for them to be having, rather than for us who are not East Asian people to be having on their behalf.
No, they are having the conversation. I get East Asian people saying, it's great that there's black and brown, but why isn't there a color to represent us? We are constantly excluded and ignored in the LGBT community.
Right.
And that is totally true. people from Malaysia and China and Japan and Taiwan and those countries, they are not included in the mainstream LGBT plus narrative. And I think that's wrong. They need to be included, which is not to exclude you or black, brown people. It's just we want to make it fully inclusive.
Yeah, totally. And Taiwan, of course, have just got this week, I did read this week, now got same-gender marriage. So the first Asian country to do that, am I right?
I haven't heard.
Yes? Am I right? Okay, that's good. I thought I read that somewhere this week, so great. So maybe this is up and coming, can be sort of part and feel more part of this.
But I think it's indicative, we're not listening to East Asian people in our own community.
Yeah.
They come to me and my organization and tell us, we're not happy.
Yeah.
We want to be included too. And I think they have a valid voice and they should be listened to.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Peter. Did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, no. The comment I wanted to make was about the pink triangle, because, you know, when I was growing up, it was the symbol for gay liberation was actually the pink triangle, which was the symbol that was used in the concentration camps to denote homosexuals.
Yeah, yeah.
And that kind of sort of, you know, I think is a really important that one remembers that history.
Yeah.
And that symbol was there, you know, for that point.
Yeah.
And that kind of seems to have gotten forgotten within the kind of the rainbow flag.
Yeah. Now we are really touching on the next place where I wanted to sort of take us, which was what now are the key issues? What now are it's 2019, 50 years of activism. Oh, hello, Paris Lees, everybody. That's okay.
Hello.
Well, you've timed that quite right. So I just, hello. Thank you for joining us. Let's get your voice on this straight away then. So just reached a point about, we've been talking about activism right the way for the last 50 years, and we've just reached a point where we're going, well, what are the key issues right now? What should we be debating, and what does activism mean today? What's it mean to you, Paris?
Well, obviously, I'm very passionate about transgender rights, so I would say that protecting trans kids is the #1 issue. I'd really love to help adult trans people who are struggling, but it's much easier to make sure that people don't grow up with all of the complications and damage that comes from being bullied and being rejected by your family than it is to deal with that later down the road. And I've been really inspired recently by the campaign to raise money for mermaids, which saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez come in along with Maura Wilson and H-Bomber Guy, who's a YouTuber, and Susie Green at Mermaids. And I took part in this live feed, this fundraiser, and it was so amazing to see all of these people who aren't actually directly affected by trans equality coming together to try and make life better for trans people. So not only am I grateful for that solidarity, I'm genuinely so inspired to be a better ally myself for causes that don't directly affect me, because we're under attack, and my struggle is your struggle. And you know, I can't remember who did the quote now, but it's there's variations of the quote: nobody's free until we're all free. So I feel like every struggle is important, but we're going to have something that we're passionate about, but we're not going to do this if we don't all come together as an LGBT and, you know, wider community.
Absolutely. So why do we feel that we're so far behind? Because I get that sense as well around gender identity, because when I go into my schools now, it's all about gender identity. Is it just that there is a lack of knowledge? Is there a fear? You know, why are we so far behind in understanding gender identity? Do you want to comment on that, Paul?
Well, I feel like it's maybe harder for me to weigh in on that as like a cis woman. So,
okay.
Paris?
Okay. Do you want to carry on the conversation there then, Paris?
All right, but I think that, you know, one of the reasons comes back to this dreaded Section 28,
right,
where sort of, you know, all talk of homosexuality, you know, gay, lesbian sex was completely sort of forbidden. So in terms of classroom and sex education, you know, it was just removed. It was not spoken about. And I think that leaves a huge gaping hole in people's, you know, in kids' education.
Yes.
So how on earth can you sort of, you know, you've got to open it, and, you know, that really, I mean, I think that it starts with schools.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I would just say I think that, not to criticise anybody else's campaigns or activism, but we're talking about activism, right? Yeah. I think that maybe some of the campaigns for me were maybe not what I would have chosen to focus on. So, for instance, the Gender Recognition Act. I think it does need reforming. I think there's some issues there. And I know that it means a lot to a lot of people. It meant a lot to me knowing that I could change my birth certificate when I was a teenager. But I feel that all too often we can get sucked into other people's agendas. So we spend so much time firefighting these horrible sort of, going back to Section 28, trans people are rapists, predators, that sort of thing. And actually we're not focusing on the stuff where we could make a real difference. And I feel like we were making some progress a few years ago in framing trans rights as an anti-bullying issue. And ultimately, I think it is an anti-bullying issue. And I would rather see as much effort put into what I'm calling for, which is every school in Britain to have a robust anti-bullying policy that explicitly protects against all base of gender-based bullying, whether that's misogyny, homophobia, or transphobia, because nobody should be getting bullied because of their gender in 2019 in Britain. And that's not controversial. That's something where we could actually people could get behind. It's very hard to argue with. So I think it's about how we frame the arguments, actually. And I think that maybe we need to think in the trans community about how we frame this so that we're not constantly put into a reactive, defensive position where we're allowing other people to frame the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I mean, we do know, our young people were not born with prejudice. It's just really as simple as that. We're not born racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic. We've got to remember these are outside influences that are put upon our young people. So I just would like to sort of explore that a little bit further. So what are these negative outside influences? Why does prejudice get to our young people? And why, in education, are we having to undo this and get our young people to unlearn that in schools? Do you want to comment on that?
I think because we're still thinking about concepts of racism and transphobia as an evil that cannot be perpetuated by everyone. All white people are racist because we're born into a racist society where you are hierarchically placed at the top. And I think it's only until we start thinking about, how do we go about dismantling or having these really difficult conversations without feeling personally affronted or being like, well, I'm not a racist because X, Y, Z. It's not about you, it's about the system that you were born into, and thinking about that abstract rather than this one racist person, therefore this one person is bad. And I think once we start having those conversations, especially with younger people, and exploring that more, then that will be a sign of progress, I think.
Can you tell us more about your work and what you do and what your goal is and what do you want to achieve from the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the co-founder of Black Girl Fest, which I started with my friend Nicole in 2017. And we basically decided that there's no space for Black British women to kind of convene and have access to workshops and panels and masterclasses on the scale that we wanted to throw it on. So we were thinking a lot about the different things that we would have liked to have seen when we were younger. So for example, being a queer Black woman, I wanted to be privy to conversations about what it's like to be someone in the Black community who may not identify as cis or as straight, and then having those conversations, especially with a particular lens, a cultural lens, and what it's like existing in Afro-Caribbean communities with those identities. So then if I had those conversations when I was younger, then who knows what my journey might have looked like. So we've programmed loads of different things around, politics of hair and beauty and gender and sexuality. And yeah, we just threw a festival and it was really stressful, but we did it and we're doing it every year. So yeah.
How can people jump on board with what you're doing right now?
So it's literally, you can just come to the festival. So we prioritize Black women and femmes, obviously, because this stuff, all of these workshops, all of the work we're doing is for our community. But also you can donate. But we know that there are white parents who have mixed-race children, for example, and don't know how to do their child's hair, or don't know what products to buy, or things like that. So it's kind of a space for education and growth for all, but with a particular, there are a lot of masterclasses that are just for black women femmes, because we want to be funneling that knowledge to our community directly. So
brilliant. Thank you very much. So, Paris,
I just want to jump on that and say just how important it is, and obviously honoured to be on the panel with Peter, who's, we all know what you've done for human rights. And I think that there's a bit of for me, there's a contrast between your kind of activism and what is considered to be an activist in 2019, because there's this selfie activism, which is if you put, and that's great, and there's a really important role for social media, and I definitely wouldn't have the career that I have if it wasn't for Twitter, so it's not to diminish that, but I think it's not a replacement for grassroots activism. And I think people need to be donating, they need to be looking at where they're shopping, they need to be organising, they need to be turning up, you need to be active to be an activist. So yeah, that's what I would say. Just like, what can you do to help? And I think the best advice that anybody gave me was when I was thinking of getting into activism, I contacted a YouTuber, an actress called Calpurnia Adams. Does anyone know who Calpurnia Adams is? And she said, just do what you can. Just do what you can. And for me, that was writing. So there's something that every single person in this room can do to contribute to make the world better for LGBT people and for everybody. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you very much. Is just
yes. I was going to say, I would like to row back the conversation to the very opening question. Yeah. Because I think we sort of skipped a bit of that. For those of us like myself who are involved in the early lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender movement, it was very different from today. For a start, the word equality never passed our lips. We were not interested in equality, we were interested in liberation. The premise of equality is that you want equal status with what they have, with what is. And the critique of the LGBT plus liberation movement in the early 1970s was, we don't accept the status quo. We don't accept things as they are. We want to change society for the benefit of everyone. We don't want equality within a fundamentally unjust society. So the agenda of the early LGBT plus liberation movement was to make common cause with women, black people, the Irish people struggle, working class people, and so on. We saw a coalition of the marginalized to come together on the basis that unity is strength. And if we each supported each other, we would collectively be stronger. So that's why, for example, the Gay Liberation Front in London was the main supporter of the early women's liberation campaigns, the main non-women's organization that supported the early women's liberation movement, doing big protests like at the Royal Albert Hall during the Miss World contest in 1971, where GLF's contribution was to stage an alternative pageant on the street outside with misconceived, mistreated, misunderstood, etc., to highlight the sexism and misogyny of that competition. We were also the only non-black group to rally in support of the Mangrove 9 when they were on trial. These were 9 black activists in West London who were framed by the police. The Gay Liberation Front was the only non-black group there to stand in solidarity with them, because we understood that the struggle of black people or women or the Irish was part of a common struggle for liberation. So I think equality is a problematic concept. Of course, we do want equality, but not within the system as it is. The agenda must be about social transformation. And bringing it up to today, I think what is so fantastic is that we are in the throes of a new revolution, a gender revolution being spearheaded by trans, non-binary, and gender-fluid people, which is questioning all the orthodoxies around male and female, masculine and feminine. And in the process, is going to liberate us all. Because those are nice little boxes that tradition and orthodoxy has set up. But we know that most people don't fit into those boxes. And we want everybody to not be the prison or the prisoner of gender.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So putting together what Peter's just said, I want to come to you, Paris, and just say, do you feel now, as a younger activist at this point, are we collectively stronger now? I mean, especially in this political climate that we are in right now. What's your sense of that now in 2019?
Well, I mean, I can't really compare it to the 80s, but I think that definitely in the past couple of years, I've seen people have got on board with the idea of intersectionality, and that felt like it was quite an esoteric academic term not that long ago, and it's like, you know, basically we're all woke now, aren't we? And you know, we're all kind of showing up for other people's struggles. It's so disappointing to me that a lot of the hostility to trans rights comes from people claiming to be speaking up for equality, you know, claiming to be feminists. And I, you know, when I was at university, my favourite quote was the Dale Spender one. I can't do it ad verbatim, but you know, she says, you know, feminism has fought no wars. It's you know, done no harm, done no evil. You know, when somebody says, you know, are you a feminist? I say, yeah. Why wouldn't I be? And it's like, well, actually, I feel that a lot of people have really tarnished that they're using feminism, and there's no excuse for bigotry, whether it's dressed up as religion or ideology or feminism. So that's just so disappointing to me. And actually, you know, there are a lot of people who are very hostile towards trans people who write some really good things about, you know, women's services being cut or about male violence against women. And it's just like, if you could just focus on that and we could find the common ground to actually fight back against these systems of oppression that affects everybody, you know, it's very depressing to me to see people who are not served well by the current system. And this idea, you know, that I would support male violence against women, that I've never been affected by domestic violence, that when I'm walking down the street by myself late at night, that I don't feel worried if I hear a man's footsteps behind me. It's just, it's so cruel to do that to trans women, to say you're going to get all of this shit, you know, for being a woman, and I'm not supposed, they told me I'm not allowed to swear because it's being streamed. Good luck with that. They knew what they were signing up for, but and then you get all of this extra rubbish on top of, you know, saying you're not a real woman, and it's like, well, I'm being, you know, I'm being treated like a woman for the purposes of patriarchy. So it's like, you know, yeah, it's just, it's very depressing. So I'd like to see more unity, but you know, for me, the young people give me hope. They really do. I think the kids are going to save us with the climate change activism. I don't know about you, but I personally, I'm so angry. No offense, you know, but sort of Gen X and baby boomers, the people that are running things and sort of screwing everything up at the moment. I feel really, 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 really let down by them and their inability to do anything about climate change. And I do want to talk about climate change because, you know, Sir David Attenborough said, you know, it threatens the breakdown of civilization. And I wonder if people have really thought about what that means, because civilization means civilized norms. It means people respecting each other. It means rule of law. It means having food in supermarkets. And we all need to be climate change activists first and foremost, because who do you think societal breakdown is going to affect first? It's LGBT people, it's BME people, it's minorities, it's disabled, and it's real, and it's going to happen. So I think we all need to pull together and work out what we're going to do about this, how we're going to come together to face some of the very, very big, real existential threats we as a human race face, because otherwise we are literally going to die.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So Paula, you as representing the youth perspective as well, just picking on that, sort of like the activism, the issues going forwards, is intersectionality, is that the key thing that we should be looking at now?
Yes, but not using it as a badge. It's like, well, I'm intersectional because I have these kind of identities that cross over. It's like actually thinking about the oppression of the people at those apexes and how we are adversely affected, rather than kind of, well, you know, I had like a black friend who was queer, you know, it's actually thinking about meaningful and structural change. And you know, I think there's a lot more work that's being done around decolonization in terms of decolonizing universities. So thinking about the curriculum that we're taught, which is, you know, pale men's ale, and how that informs the way that we all kind of think about education and informs people's actual journeys through higher education, or decolonizing like healthcare and contraception, for example, because black people weren't included in most of those studies, so therefore it's always skewed and disadvantaged, like we're at a disadvantage. So thinking about the ways in which our society actually affects marginalized communities because we were never considered, and then it's like only then can we actually have those meaningful conversations.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for all those amazing points. I do want to start sort of summing up now at this point. So I want some final gems of information here that we can give to this lovely crowd here and everybody watching on the metro.co.uk on the Facebook Live of how you can get involved. You know, so just to give us some gems, what can we do? What are the issues going forward? How can people jump on board? So can we all give a little bit of gem of advice? And we've got about a minute each to do that. So we start over here with Jonathon.
Well, I think as Paris has said, I think the main thing is to deal with the major issue, which is climate change. And I think that should be the area that galvanizes everybody, because it affects the whole human race. So one doesn't have to break it down into smaller units or what have you. Dealing as a human being, that's the area that one needs to look at. And go for it.
No one's going to respect your pronouns when people are fighting for food in the supermarkets, you know. And it's not that you know, trans equality is one or the other. I'm saying that it is dependent on everything's dependent on the planet. But what I would say is, the best advice someone gave me as well was just do what you can when you can. You know, like there's the whole thing in activism of burnout, right? You know, because we're passionate and we want to make the world a better place, particularly if it's something that's close to our hearts. And I would just say, everybody has a contribution. So it could be a little thing. It could be helping an individual person who's struggling with something. It could be making sure that your workplace has a non-discrimination policy that explicitly, there's something in place for people who've got HIV. Or it could be, making sure that your school explicitly states about gender-based bullying and racially aggravated bullying. So everybody can do something. It could just be a conversation with your parents, you know, and that's what I would say, is that you've got the power to do something, so do something.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Peter, do you want to give some final gems?
Not about gems, but hey. Every social progress in history has been the result of collective action. Of course, the only social reform worth fighting for is one that will benefit the individual. We must never lose sight of the individual. But the way you get that change for the individual is us by coming together and working for it. So I would say it's the collective power of us, whether it be as LGBT plus people, black people, women, disabled people, people struggling for liberation around the world. It's collective action that makes change. Yeah. And when it comes to LGBTs, our activism has been crucial to the changes we've won and have yet to win. And I always like to say that an LGBT activist is an LGBT person who's got up off their knees and said, enough.
Right, thank you so much, Peter. And Paula?
Yeah, I think being called an activist can be like quite a scary term, and it makes you think that you have to go to protests and be picketing, and there are actually loads of ways that you can be showing everyday activism. So whether it's donating to someone's like top surgery crowdfunder, for example, or donating to mermaids, and just thinking about the different ways or the different changes, the minute changes that don't feel necessarily hugely revolutionary, but actually having a profound impact beyond you, and thinking about what you can do with those.
Wonderful, that's great. Thank you so much for that. I truly hope all of you out there are feeling totally inspired and totally empowered to go out there and make that positive change, because you all can. It's all of our responsibilities. So please, can you give this fantastic panel, Paula Akpan, Peter Tatchell, Paris Lees, Jonathon Blake, the most amazing round of applause. Well done. Well done. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Brilliant.